My father cut me out of his will and gave our ranch to my brother-in-law. So here I am, 41 years old, sitting in this leather chair that's probably worth more than my monthly salary. The thing creaks every time I shift my weight, like it's judging me. Professor Jack Thompson, they call me at the university. Right now, though, I feel more like a kid called to principal's office. The law office smells of lemon polish and disappointment. It's a sterile scent trying and failing to cover the mustiness of 1,000 forgotten deeds. The only sound is the quiet tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the corner, counting down the seconds of my official disinheritance. 3 weeks since we put Dad in the ground, and I'm still hearing his voice from our last phone call. He wanted to sell off the Bone Valley parcel to cover debts. I called him short-sighted. He called me an ivory tower dreamer who couldn't run a lemonade stand, let alone a ranch. Those were the last real words between us. The lawyer, this guy Morrison, who looks like he was born in a 3-piece suit, starts reading Dad's will in that monotone voice they must teach in law school. My sister Sarah sits across from me with her husband Brian, both wearing matching sympathy faces that don't quite reach their eyes. The ranch goes into trust management. Brian gets to run it. Makes sense. He's been practically living there the past 5 years, knows every fence post and cattle trail. Me? I get a lifetime annuity. Fancy word for allowance. The numbers aren't bad, actually. Enough to keep my apartment, buy my books, maintain my comfortable professor lifestyle. But it's what it represents that burns. Dad's final word in our argument. Even from beyond the grave, he's telling me I'm not capable, not strong enough, not practical enough. Sarah reaches over and pats my hand like I'm some fragile thing. Brian clears his throat and mentions something about family legacy and doing what's best for everyone. The ranch has been in our family for 4 generations. Now it'll be run by a guy who married into it 5 years ago. The irony tastes bitter. Morrison drones on about tax implications and distribution schedules. My mind wanders to my students, probably wondering why I canceled today's lecture on the Dust Bowl era. If only they knew their professor was living his own little agricultural tragedy. There's something beautifully pathetic about teaching history, while watching your own family's history slip through your fingers like sand. Then Morrison stops mid-sentence, adjusts his glasses, that little gesture that lawyers do when they're about to drop something unexpected. He coughs, a dry sound that echoes in the wood-paneled room. There's one more thing, specifically for Jack. He says, your father left very clear instructions that this box should go to you and only you. No one else is to open it or examine its contents. Sarah and Brian exchange glances. I can read their faces. What could Dad possibly leave me that he didn't want them to see? Morrison produces this old cardboard box, the kind you find in an attic, held together with yellowing tape and good intentions. It's maybe the size of a large shoebox, unremarkable in every way except the fact that my practical, unsentimental father thought it important enough to specifically will to his disappointment of a son. The weight of it surprises me when Morrison hands it over. Not heavy exactly, but substantial, like it contains something that matters. Sarah leans forward, curiosity overcoming her practiced composure. Brian's jaw tightens just slightly. The businessman in him doesn't like unknowns. I could open it right there. Part of me wants to, just to see their faces. But something stops me. Maybe it's the way Morrison quickly moves on to the final formalities, like he's instructed not to linger on this moment. Maybe it's the faint, musty smell coming from the box that reminds me of Dad's study, that room where he kept things that mattered. The drive back to my apartment takes 2 hours. 2 hours with that box sitting in the passenger seat, like a silent companion. I stop once at a rest stop, consider opening it in the parking lot, then decide against it. Whatever's in there waited this long. It can wait until I'm home. My apartment is exactly what you'd expect from a history professor. Books everywhere. Not in a charming way. More in a I might be one documentary away from appearing on a hoarding show way. I clear space on my desk, pushing aside half-graded papers about the Industrial Revolution. Inside the box are journals. My grandfather's journals. To be exact, the man died when I was 12, but I remember him. Tough as leather, hands like gnarled tree roots. Could tell you what the weather would be just by looking at the sky. He built that ranch from nothing, turned scrubland into something worth having. The journals are leather-bound, the real kind, not the fake stuff they sell at Barnes & Noble. The first one dates back to 1952. Grandpa would have been 25, just starting out. The handwriting is careful, deliberate, like each word costs him something to write. But it's not the journals themselves that make me sit down hard in my desk chair. It's the note on top in Dad's handwriting. His barely legible scrawl that I'd recognize anywhere. Just a few lines, but they change everything. Jack, the note says, I couldn't figure it out. Spent 30 years trying. Maybe you can. Your grandfather knew something I didn't. The answers are in here somewhere. The ranch is dying, son. Brian doesn't know it yet, but the numbers don't lie. We've got maybe 2 years before the bank comes calling. I'm too proud and too tired to watch it happen. This is my Hail Mary pass. I read it 3 times before it sinks in. My father, the man who never admitted weakness, who never asked for help, who called me an ivory tower dreamer, left me these journals not as some sentimental gesture, but as an act of desperation. He didn't know what else to do. The irony is almost too perfect. Here I am, the family historian, the one who chose dusty books over dusty fields, and Dad's final act was to hand me exactly that, dusty books. But not because he suddenly valued my expertise. No, this was different. This was faith. Not in me, maybe, but in something. In the possibility that somewhere in Grandpa's careful handwriting was a solution he couldn't see. I pour myself a whiskey, the good stuff. The first journal opens with crack, revealing Grandpa's careful handwriting about water rights and something called the Bone Valley parcel, the same piece of land Dad wanted to sell. But my eyes keep drifting back to Dad's note. The universe's joke finally lands, and it's a gut punch. Dad didn't write me off. He'd already given up on the ranch itself. The trust, Brian's management, Sarah's involvement. It was all just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The real inheritance. The only thing he thought might save 4 generations of work was this box. Tomorrow I have to teach a class on the Great Depression, stand in front of 30 undergrads, and explain how families lost their farms to banks and drought. The bitter poetry of it isn't lost on me. Outside my window, the city lights blur through the whiskey glass. Somewhere out there, 200 miles away, the ranch sits under the same stars Grandpa would have seen when he wrote these words. I run my fingers over the leather covers. 12 volumes. Tomorrow, I'll start reading properly. Tonight, I just sit with quiet, terrifying realization. Dad didn't leave me the ranch. He left me a puzzle, a chance, and the crushing weight of being the last hope of a man who realized too late that the answers aren't always in the soil, but in the stories we leave behind. The son, he called a dreamer, might have to find a miracle in the dreams of another man. The next 3 weeks, I become that professor everyone avoids in the faculty lounge. You know the type. Wild eyes, coffee-stained shirt, muttering about patterns only they can see. Except my patterns are real, scattered across 12 leather journals and slowly taking over my apartment like academic kazoo. I start simple. Reading chronologically should make sense, right? Wrong. Grandpa wrote like he was having 3 different conversations with himself simultaneously. One entry discusses cattle prices. The next, soil pH levels near something he calls the Bone Valley. Then, without warning, he's sketching mushrooms with the detail of a botanist. Not regular mushrooms, either. These things look like nature's own abstract art project. By week 2, my living room looks like a scene from A Beautiful Mind, minus the genius part. Maps cover every wall. I've got topographical surveys from the county office, geological reports I barely understand, and weather patterns going back decades. My coffee table disappeared under color-coded sticky notes. Blue for water sources, yellow for unusual plant life, red for the entries where Grandpa gets cryptic, writing things like, "The roots remember what we forget." My students definitely notice something's off. During a lecture on agriculture innovation in the early 20th century, I catch myself talking about mycorrhizal networks instead of crop rotation. 23 blank faces stare back at me. One kid in the back row is literally asleep. Can't blame him. I'm turning into one of those professors I used to mock. The breakthrough comes at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'm comparing Grandpa's sketches to modern mycological databases when I notice it. He keeps returning to one location, a place he calls a forest patch. Weird name for ranch land, but Grandpa had his own vocabulary for everything. According to his measurements, it's a narrow canyon about 3 miles from the main house. He visits it obsessively between 1954 and 1957, then never mentions it again. But here's what makes me spill coffee all over my laptop keyboard. In those 3 years, he documents something that shouldn't exist, a fungal network that he claims connects disparate water sources across the ranch. He describes it like a natural irrigation system, invisible above ground but thriving below. The detail is insane. Spore counts, soil samples, growth patterns. This isn't farmers' folklore. This is data. I need an expert. Problem is, walking into a biology department with your grandfather's journals and claiming you found a magical mushroom network is a fast track to academic ridicule. I've got tenure, sure, but there's tenure. And then there's becoming a guy who believes in agricultural fairy tales. Dr. Eris Thorne's office is in the new science building. The one that looks like a glass cube had a baby with a greenhouse. Her reputation precedes her. Brilliant, brutal, and about as warm as liquid nitrogen. She's published 3 books on ethnobotany, spent years in the Amazon documenting indigenous plant knowledge, and has zero patience for what she calls amateur naturalism. I knock. She doesn't look up from her microscope. I clear my throat. Still nothing. Finally, I just start talking. I tell her I'm not here with stories about healing crystals or ancient wisdom. I have data, observations, measurements, 60-year-old documentation of something that doesn't match any known classification. That gets her attention. She looks up, and her eyes are the color of moss after rain. Sharp, calculating. She's younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with the kind of focus intensity that probably scare away most of her grad students. Show me, she says. I spread out Grandpa's most detailed sketches, his measurements, his observations about growth patterns and seasonal variations. She studies them like a chess player analyzing an opponent's opening move. 5 minutes pass. 10. The only sound is the hum of grow lights from the lab next door. Then she pulls out a massive textbook, flips to a section on symbiotic relationships, points to a diagram. Grandpa's sketch is more detailed, more complete, but the basic structure is similar, except for one thing. The connective patterns Grandpa documented are orders of magnitude more complex. This symbiosis pattern, she says finally, running her finger along Grandpa's drawing. It doesn't exist in any classification I know. Your grandfather was either an extraordinary observer or a talented fiction writer. I'm curious to find out which. She starts firing questions at me. Soil types at the ranch, average rainfall, seasonal temperature variations. I answer what I can, admit what I don't know. She nods, makes notes in handwriting worse than my father's. Then she stops, looks at me with those moss-colored eyes. When do we leave? She asks. The question catches me off guard. I expected skepticism, maybe mockery. Not this. But Eris Thorne didn't build her career on playing it safe. She built it on following indigenous knowledge to scientific discoveries, on believing that traditional observations often contain empirical truths that modern science hasn't caught up to yet. We need 3 days, she says. Minimum. Proper equipment. Soil testing kit. Sample containers. She's already making a list, talking more to herself than to me. Portable spectrometer, if I can borrow one from geology. Camera with macro lens. GPS mapper. I mentioned that my brother-in-law runs the ranch now, that he might not be thrilled about us poking around. She waves this off like it's a minor detail. Ranch families always have their dynamics, she says. We'll deal with it when we get there. The next week is a blur of preparation. Eris approaches this like a military operation. She creates spreadsheets of equipment, optimal testing conditions, contingency plans. I contribute what I can detailed maps from Grandpa's journals, his seasonal observations, patterns I've noticed in his documentation. We meet every evening in her lab. She teaches me basic field sampling techniques, while I translate more of Grandpa's cryptic notes. He had his own notation system, abbreviations that took me days to decode. RT means root temperature. MD is moisture depth. FB is fungal bloom, always noted with exact dates and weather conditions. One night, she asked me why I'm really doing this. The question hangs in the air between us like spores in sunlight. I could tell her about the ranch's financial troubles, about proving something to my dead father, about family legacy. Instead, I tell her the truth. I'm tired of teaching other people's histories. I want to discover something myself, even if it's just understanding what my grandfather saw in a handful of mushrooms. She nods like this makes perfect sense, tells me about spending months in the rainforest, following stories that scientists dismiss as mythology, only to find they were based on observable phenomena. The best science, she says, often starts with someone paying attention to what everyone else ignores. We schedule the trip for next weekend. 3 days at the ranch, assuming Brian doesn't throw us off the property. Eris seems unconcerned about this possibility. She's dealt with suspicious landowners before, she says. The trick is to make them think it was their idea to let you stay. Friday afternoon, I'm packing my camping gear when my phone rings. It's Sarah. She never calls unless something's wrong, but her voice is strange. Not worried. Curious. She says Brian found something while checking fence lines near the old growth section. Mushrooms. Everywhere. More than anyone's seen in years. Growing in patterns that don't make sense. I tell her I'm coming to visit. Don't mention Eris. Don't mention the journals. Just say I want to see the old place. She sounds surprised but pleased. Says it'll be good to have family around. Brian's been stressed lately. The ranch finances are worse than expected. After I hang up, I call Eris. Tell her about the mushrooms. She's quiet for a moment, then says something that sends chills down my spine. Fungal blooms like that usually happen for a reason. Sometimes it's rain. Sometimes it's temperature. And sometimes it's because something in the ecosystem is dying and the network is responding. Saturday morning comes gray and humid, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavy with possibility. I load my truck with equipment hidden under camping gear. Normal stuff on top, scientific equipment below. Like I'm smuggling knowledge across the border of skepticism. Eris meets me at a gas station outside town. She's traded her lab coat for hiking boots and cargo pants with more pockets than seems necessary. Her truck is even more loaded than mine. She's brought enough equipment to start a field station. When I mention this seems like overkill for a 3-day trip, she just says that in her experience, the most important discoveries happen when you're equipped for them. The drive to the ranch takes 3 hours. We don't talk much, but it's comfortable silence. She reviews Grandpa's notes while I navigate roads I haven't driven in years. Every mile brings back memories. That's where Dad taught me to change a tire. That's where we'd stop to watch the sunset. That's where I told him I was choosing graduate school over the ranch. 20 miles from the ranch, Eris asks me to pull over for baseline soil samples. While she works, smelling of earth and possibility, I watch her hands move with practiced precision. She's like a hunter who's caught the scent of something remarkable. The drive blurs past, familiar landmarks triggering memories I don't have time for now. Eris pulls me back to the present, reading one last entry from Grandpa's journal, marked with my red flag. The land speaks in languages we've forgotten how to hear. But if you listen with your hands in the soil and your mind open to impossibility, sometimes it tells you its secrets. She closes the journal. Your grandfather wasn't just a farmer, she says, her moss-colored eyes fixed on a road ahead. He was a scientist. He just didn't know what to call it. 5 miles out now. The mountains that frame the ranch loom larger. The tension in the truck is palpable. We're both coiled springs waiting to release. Sarah's call about the mushroom bloom echoes in my head. Brian and his skepticism are waiting. We're not just looking for fungi anymore. We're hunting for a secret, a legacy, and maybe a miracle hidden right under my family's feet. The time for reading history is over. It's time to make some. The ranch gate looks smaller than I remember. Memory has a way of making childhood places seem grander. But the squeak when I open it, that's exactly the same. Brian's already waiting on the porch, arms crossed in that universal posture of suspicious brother-in-laws everywhere. Sarah runs out, genuine happiness on her face. She hugs me like we haven't spent the last 5 years barely talking. Brian watches Eris unload her equipment with the expression of someone who just found scientists in his backyard, which, technically, he has. Dinner that night is a masterclass in awkward family dynamics. Brian keeps steering conversation toward why we're really here. Eris, brilliant as ever, launches into a discussion about soil composition that's so boring even I zone out. By dessert, Brian's convinced we're harmless academics playing in dirt. Sarah just seems happy to have family around. She mentions the mushroom bloom 3 times, says it's the strangest thing they've seen in years. Next morning, we're up before dawn. I know where we're going, the forest patch from Grandpa's journals. It's a 3-mile hike through terrain that hasn't seen maintenance since the Bush era. First Bush, not the second one. Brian offered to drive us, but I declined. Some journeys you need to take on foot, the way your grandfather did. The trail is overgrown but still there, like the land remembers being walked on. Eris takes samples every quarter mile, documenting everything with the thoroughness of someone who knows they might be writing history, or at least a really good research paper. 2 hours in, we hit the canyon entrance. It's narrow, maybe 15 feet wide, walls rising 40 feet on either side. Grandpa called it a forest patch because inside, protected from wind and cattle, a microforest thrives. Cottonwoods, willows, even a few pines that have no business growing at this elevation. But it's what's on the ground that stops us cold. Mushrooms, not scattered randomly like you'd expect. They form patterns, spirals, networks, connections that look almost deliberate. Eris drops to her knees, pulls out her field kit. Her hand shakes slightly as she takes samples. This isn't just unusual. This is unprecedented. She starts explaining about mycelial networks, how fungi connect trees underground, sharing nutrients and information. But this, she says, examining a particularly dense cluster through her hand lens, this is different. The diversity, the organization, the sheer biomass. It's like finding a coral reef in the desert. I help her document everything. GPS coordinates, photographs, soil samples at various depths. We work in focused silence, both understanding we're standing in something special. This is what Grandpa saw. What he tried to describe with his farmer's vocabulary and careful sketches. Around noon, Eris pulls out a field testing kit, runs some basic chemistry that I pretend to understand. Her face goes through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, then something approaching awe. She shows me the results. I don't understand the numbers, but her reaction tells me everything. These compounds, she says, voice barely above a whisper. They're novel. Completely unknown to science. We need a real lab, Jack. We need time to understand what this is. That's when we see them. Orange surveyor ribbons tied to trees, leading directly into our canyon. Fresh ribbons, maybe a week old. The kind developers use to mark boundaries before breaking ground. My stomach drops. Brian, he's not just managing the ranch. He's preparing to sell it, or at least parts of it. This canyon, this hidden miracle Grandpa protected for decades, is about to become someone's investment opportunity. We follow the ribbons back, counting them like breadcrumbs of doom. They lead all the way to the access road. Someone's already been here with heavy equipment, clearing a path wide enough for trucks. This isn't preliminary exploration. This is preparation for something big. Back at the ranch house, Brian's in his office with 2 men in suits. City suits, not the kind locals wear to church. Through the window, I can see architectural plans spread on his desk. Sarah's in the kitchen, stress baking her 3rd pie of the day. She knows something's happening, but not what. That evening, Eris and I set up a makeshift lab in the old barn. She runs every field test she can with portable equipment. I watch her work, this brilliant woman who dropped everything to chase my grandfather's mushroom dreams. The data builds, each test confirming what the previous one suggested. We're sitting on something extraordinary. But time's running out. I can feel it like electricity before a storm. Brian's moving fast. Probably has been for months. The mushroom bloom Sarah mentioned, it might be the network's response to disturbance. A last desperate fruiting before destruction. I spend the night going through Grandpa's journals again, looking for something, anything that might help. That's when I find it. An entry from 1958, different from the others, more formal, like he was documenting something legal. He writes about a government deal, trading flooded valley land for something else. But he's cryptic about the details, mentions only that he secured permanent protection for what matters most. At the time, I thought he meant the main ranch. Now I'm not so sure. Next morning, I drive to the county courthouse. The records room smells like dust and broken dreams. The clerk, ancient woman who probably knew my grandfather, helps me navigate their pre-digital filing system. It takes 4 hours of searching through boxes that haven't been opened since disco was popular. Then I find it, a federal agreement from 1958. The government needed to flood part of our valley for a reservoir project. But Grandpa didn't just sell. He negotiated. In exchange for flooded land, he secured something called a conservation easement, not for the whole ranch. That would have been noticed just for one specific area, the Forest Patch Canyon. But here's the beautiful part. He didn't frame it as conservation. He called it traditional medicinal plant gathering rights, and somehow got the Bureau of Indian Affairs involved. The document references historical use by Crow Nation peoples and permanent protection of indigenous botanical resources. It's ironclad. Any development would violate federal law and trigger legal action from both the government and the Crow Nation. My grandfather, the German immigrant farmer, somehow convinced the federal government that this canyon was sacred to Native Americans. The genius of it takes my breath away. He protected his secret by wrapping it in something no developer would dare touch, indigenous rights and federal oversight. I make copies of everything. Drive straight to the best property lawyer in the state, guy who charges more per hour than I make in a day. He reads the documents 3 times, makes some calls to verify their authenticity. Then he leans back in his chair and laughs. Actually laughs. This is bulletproof, he says. Anyone who tries to develop that land isn't just facing a lawsuit. They're facing federal prosecution and a public relations nightmare. No developer would touch this with a 10-foot pole once they know it exists. 3 days later, we're in another lawyer's office. Brian's lawyer. Brian's there with his investors. 2 men who clearly expect this to be a formality. Sarah's there too, looking confused about why she was asked to attend. Eris sits beside me, our secret weapon who nobody's paying attention to. Brian's lawyer starts explaining the development proposal. Luxury camping resort. He calls it glamping, ecotourism, all words designed to make destruction sound sustainable. The investors nod along, already counting their profits. Then I slide the documents across the table. The 1958 agreement, the federal easement, the Crow Nation connection. Brian's lawyer reads them, his face going through the same stages of grief I've seen in every lawyer who's realized their case just evaporated. He clears his throat, looks at the investors. Gentlemen, he says, this changes everything. Not only can you not develop the proposed area, but any attempt to do so would trigger immediate federal intervention and potential lawsuits from the Crow Nation. The liability alone could run into millions. The word Crow Nation does it. The investors exchange glances, then stand up without a word. They leave like men who've just discovered they were about to step on a landmine. Brian sits there, face red, hands clenched. Sarah looks between us, understanding dawning. Brian storms out. His lawyer follows, probably already calculating how to bill for this disaster. Sarah stays. She looks at me, then at the documents, then back at me. Grandpa did this? She asks. I nod. She starts crying, but they're not sad tears. 2 weeks later, Brian files for bankruptcy. The development deal was his last shot at saving the ranch from creditors. Without it, he's got nothing. The ranch goes into foreclosure proceedings. It should be a disaster, But Eris has been busy. She's been in contact with her university. The preliminary analysis of the fungi compounds has people excited, very excited. The chemistry department wants in. The medical school wants in. Suddenly, we're not talking about a failed ranch. We're talking about a research station with potential pharmaceutical applications. The university makes an offer, not a loan, an investment. They'll provide funding to purchase the ranch at foreclosure in exchange for exclusive research rights to the canyon area. It's not charity. It's business. They've run the numbers on what one novel antibiotic could be worth. The ranch is a bargain at any price. We structure it carefully. I'll own the land, but the university gets a 99-year research lease on the canyon. They'll fund the purchase, the renovation of buildings into research facilities, and provide ongoing operational support. In return, any discoveries belong to them, with a percentage of any eventual profits returning to the ranch. The foreclosure auction is almost anticlimactic. No other bidders show up. Word has gone out about the federal easement, making the land worthless for development. We purchase it for barely more than the outstanding debt. Brian doesn't even attend. Sarah comes to me afterwards. She's been thinking. She says, the ranch needs more than research. It needs education, preservation, a mission beyond just science. She wants to help. She wants to create an educational foundation in Grandpa's name, bring school kids out to learn about ecology, about fungi, about the connections that run beneath our feet. I say yes immediately, not because she's family, but because she's right. Grandpa didn't preserve this place for scientists. He preserved it for the future, for all the kids who might one day need to understand that some things are worth protecting just because they exist. 6 months later, everything's different. The old ranch house is now a field station. Graduate students occupy the bunkhouse. Eris leads a team of researchers who've already published 3 papers on the canyon's unique ecosystem. The first paper alone caused what scientists call a paradigm shift. Turns out, Grandpa's mushrooms might hold keys to understanding fungal communication networks that could revolutionize agriculture. The pharmaceutical interest came faster than anyone expected. A major company bought rights to develop drugs from 2 compounds Eris isolated. The upfront payment covered all our debts. The potential royalties could fund the ranch for generations. Funny how something so small, so quiet, so easy to overlook, turned out to be worth more than all the cattle we ever raised. Sarah's educational program is thriving. School buses arrive twice a week. Kids who've never seen anything but concrete spend days learning about mycorrhizal networks, about how forests talk to each other through fungi, about how the smallest things sometimes matter most. She's brilliant at it, finally using her teaching degree for something that matters to her. Brian never came back. Last I heard, he was selling real estate in Phoenix. He sends Sarah divorce papers on what would have been their 6th anniversary. She signs them with relief rather than sadness. Some partnerships, like some ecosystems, just aren't meant to survive. Today, I'm standing with Eris on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where Grandpa probably stood, planning his quiet revolution. The ranch is alive in ways it hasn't been for decades, not with cattle, but with purpose. Scientists, students, visitors, all drawn by the mystery Grandpa protected and Dad couldn't solve. Eris takes my hand. We've been together for 8 months now, drawn together by fungi and frontier dreams. She's accepted a permanent position at the university. Says she's found her life's work in that canyon. I've returned to teaching, but now I bring my students here, show them history being made rather than just reading about it. You want to know what I finally understood about Dad's last act? He didn't disinherit me. He gave me a test disguised as a gift. He knew the ranch was failing, knew Brian's management wouldn't save it, knew Sarah's optimism couldn't pay bills. So he gave me the only thing that might matter, Grandpa's journals, his accumulated wisdom, his careful observations of something extraordinary. Dad couldn't see the answer himself. He was too practical, too focused on cattle and crops to believe in mushroom miracles. But he had just enough faith, not in me, maybe, but in the possibility that education might succeed where experience failed. That sometimes a dreamer sees what the realist cannot. I think about Grandpa's words a lot now. Home isn't where you're born. It's where you finally stop running. For years, I ran from this place, from its demands and disappointments. But I wasn't running from the ranch. I was running from the wrong definition of what it could be. Eris squeezes my hand as the sun sets behind the mountains. Tomorrow, a news crew is coming to film a segment about our research. Next week, the Crow Nation is sending representatives to document judicial plant use in the canyon. Turns out, Grandpa wasn't entirely wrong about the indigenous connection. Next month, Sarah's foundation is hosting its first fundraiser. The ranch survived, not as a cattle operation or a tourist destination, but as something Grandpa might have imagined in his wildest dreams. A place where science and tradition meet, where the smallest organisms teach the biggest lessons, where a family's legacy lives not in land ownership, but in stewardship of something remarkable. We found more than mushrooms in that canyon. We found medicine mystery, meaning we found that sometimes the best inheritance isn't what's handed to you, but what you're challenged to discover. And yes, we found each other, two academics who needed dirt under their fingernails to feel truly alive. The stars are coming out now. Same stars Grandpa watched. Same stars Dad died under. But tonight, they don't feel like judgment or history. They feel like possibility. The ranch isn't just saved. It's transformed. And we're finally home.